Before we get into today's story, I need to ask you something. What if the most powerful anti-aging drug in the world already exists, has existed for 70 years, costs $10 a month, and was almost banned before most people ever heard of it? By the end of this episode, you will never look at a purple wildflower the same way again. It is 1940, rural France. A French physician named Jean Sterne is studying an obscure medieval plant remedy that peasants in the French countryside had been using for centuries to relieve the symptoms of what we now call diabetes. The plant is called Galega officinalis, French lilac, a pretty purple flowering plant that grows wild across Europe. Nobody in mainstream medicine takes it seriously. It is folk medicine, grandmother's remedy, the kind of thing that gets filed under interesting but unproven and quietly forgotten. Sterne is not so sure. He isolates the active compound, studies it carefully, and begins to wonder if this forgotten medieval remedy contains something genuinely extraordinary. Welcome to Drug Tales with Dr. Saha, where every week we bring you the remarkable, surprising, and deeply human stories behind the medicines that change the world. Perfect for whenever you have a few minutes and a curious mind, whether you are driving, walking, cooking, or just sitting with a cup of coffee. Today, a $10 drug that started as a medieval plant remedy was ignored by science for decades, became the most prescribed diabetes medication in the world, and is now being quietly studied as the first drug in history that might actually slow the aging process itself. Let's get into it. To understand this story, we need to understand the problem it was trying to solve. Type 2 diabetes. If you watch the insulin episode, you will remember. The pancreas makes insulin keys. The cells are the houses. The receptor locks are on the doors. In type 2 diabetes, the factory is still working. The keys are still being made, but the locks have become stiff and resistant. The key is there. The door just will not open easily. Glucose builds up, and over time, damages blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, eyes, and heart. Jean Sterne believed French lilac might change that. The active compound he isolated was a molecule called metformin. Worth noting, metformin was first synthesized in 1922, the same year insulin was first used in humans. Two of the most important diabetes molecules in history, born in the same year. One got all the attention. The other quietly waited in a chemical notebook for 3 decades. Like being the quiet kid at school who never raised their hand and somehow ended up running the company. Sterne's clinical trials in the late 1950s showed genuinely promising results. Metformin lowered blood sugar safely. No dangerous drops, no injections, just a tablet. He named it glucophage, glucose eater. Pharmaceutical companies usually spend millions on branding. Sterne just called it what it does. Approved in France in 1957, then the UK, then most of Europe, and then, completely inexplicably, the story stalled. In the 1950s and 1960s, another drug in the same class called fenformin was found to cause a rare but potentially fatal condition called lactic acidosis. The FDA looked at fenformin, then looked at metformin, and decided because they were in the same drug class that metformin was probably equally dangerous. Without conclusive evidence, based on guilt by association. It is a bit like banning all golden retrievers because one chihuahua bit the mailman. Metformin was kept out of the United States for 40 years. 40 years, long enough for a child born that year to become a parent before the drug arrived. Metformin was finally approved by the FDA in 1994, 37 years after France. Jean Sterne was still alive to see it. Once approved, metformin's adoption was extraordinary. It worked consistently, safely, and cheaply. A month's supply costs approximately $10. You can spend more than that accidentally browsing a coffee shop menu. Today, it is the most prescribed diabetes medication in the world, used by over 200 million people in virtually every country on Earth. But now we need to talk about how it actually works. Because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Most diabetes drugs try to solve the problem by producing more insulin keys. Metformin does something completely different. Most people will think glucose only comes from what we eat. But your liver is also constantly making and releasing glucose, especially between meals and overnight, to keep your brain and body supplied with fuel. Think of your bloodstream as a busy city highway. Glucose is the traffic. In a healthy system, the liver acts like a smart traffic control center, releasing just enough glucose to keep things moving and holding back when the roads are already full. But in type 2 diabetes, the traffic control center has completely lost the plot. It keeps releasing glucose onto the highway, even when there is already a massive traffic jam, cars backed up for miles, nowhere to go. Metformin walks in and quietly turns the signal back to red. The liver stops flooding the bloodstream. The traffic clears. Blood sugar drops. But that is only half the story. Metformin also activates an enzyme called AMPK. Think of AMPK as the power management system of every cell, the software that optimizes everything. It makes the cell doors more responsive. The locks work better, more willing to open when the insulin key arrives. While insulin replaces the missing keys and GLP-1 drugs manage the system from above, metformin is the one quietly fixing the plumbing in the basement, while everyone else is talking upstairs. That is metformin's day job. But then scientists discovered its moonlighting function, and that changed everything. Diabetic patients taking metformin were not just managing their blood sugar better, they appeared to be living longer. Not just longer than diabetic patients not on metformin, but in some studies, longer than non-diabetic patients who were not taking any medication at all. Read that again. Patients with type 2 diabetes were in some analyses outliving healthy people who had no diabetes and took no medication, which makes absolutely no sense unless the drug is doing something beyond treating diabetes. AMPK activation, the same mechanism that fixes the cellular plumbing, also makes cells work more cleanly. Less oxidative stress, better self-repair, more resistance to the deterioration that accumulates with age. Metformin appears to be mimicking the biological effects of eating less without actually eating less, which is quite a trick for a $10 tablet. This brings us to the TAME trial, targeting aging with metformin. One audacious question: can metformin slow the aging process itself in healthy human beings? Not treat a disease, slow aging, not immortality. Science has enough paperwork already, but genuinely slowing the biological process of growing old. The first clinical trial in history, specifically designed to target aging itself. Results expected within the next few years. And while they wait, some of the scientists running the research are quietly taking metformin themselves. Not because the evidence is conclusive, because the safety data is extraordinary, the cost is negligible, and the potential upside is remarkable. $10 a month, 70 years of safety data. Just in case. Now let me connect some dots. 3 stories: insulin, GLP-1, metformin, 3 drugs, 3 scientists, 3 completely different journeys, all solving the same fundamental problem. And here is the extraordinary thing: they are not competing. They are complementary. Insulin replaces what type 1 patients cannot make. GLP-1 drugs reduce hunger and manage the system from above. Metformin fixes the plumbing in the basement, turns down the liver's glucose traffic, and makes the cell doors more responsive. And some researchers are now asking whether the $10 drug and the $1,000 drug working together might be more powerful than either alone. The medieval plant remedy and the desert lizard saliva sitting side by side in a prescription that might one day be looked back on as one of the most powerful combinations in the history of medicine. Jean Sterne died in 1997. He never saw metformin become the most prescribed diabetes drug in the world. He never saw the TAME trial. He never saw longevity researchers quietly taking his drug, just in case. But he believed in it. From a pretty purple flowering plant in a French meadow, to 200 million prescriptions a year, to a clinical trial asking whether humanity can slow aging itself. Some of the most important discoveries in medicine are not made in dramatic moments of inspiration. They are made by quiet people who believe in something nobody else is paying attention to and keep working until the world finally catches up. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who loves a good one. Whether they are a researcher, a scientist, a doctor, a nurse, a student, or simply someone with a curious mind. Drop any drug or discovery you want covered in the comments. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Next week, another extraordinary one. See you then.